Thanks, Mike. One of the powers behind the program, I don't know that I would say that I'm one of the powers behind the program, but I appreciate that. First of all, great turnout, actually. This is great, full room, so congratulations to the Wisconsin VMUG for a good turnout. And thank you all for, especially leaders, for inviting me out today. So we're going to do something a little bit different for this presentation. I was asked to put together a keynote, and now that I'm actually in the education department, I actually do a lot with the program, so I do work with the VCDX program. But one of the topics that I've always wanted to talk about, and talking to the leaders, they thought it would be valuable to everybody in the room, is we're going to have a chat around personal growth and professional development today. So I'm going to take you through some parts of my history and what I've learned over the years, and hopefully through some of my errors and my ways, folks can actually figure out some ways to grow their own career and grow themselves and move forward depending on where you are in the role that you're at today. So I want to start off a little bit with a quote that I've from an author, John C. Maxwell, that I've really come to enjoy and respect. And I think this is a poignant quote because growth really doesn't just happen. We all think that we continue to grow as we're in our careers. And it's kind of funny, you actually have to work at it. It's not something that just happens. What I've found is you kind of leave college and high school, and all of a sudden, you think you're going to keep learning, but a lot of us don't. We sort of have to educate ourselves as we go, and they're giving away the home lab, which I think is great because I've actually got a little bit that I want to talk about on home labs. So I want you to think about this quote as I go through this conversation and think about how this applies to you. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself. It's interesting. I grew up actually as an introvert, like I think a lot of IT people are, and a couple of these things sort of apply, right? Even today, I live on 16 acres of land and no neighbors. It's not because I don't enjoy people, I just don't like crowds generally, but I keep to myself, right? And actually it's strange that I do these talks because when I was growing up I was deathly afraid of public speaking. Even now, you'll always see me off stage just before, and I'm usually having a little word with myself and making sure that I'm comfortable and I'm ready to go. And when I first started doing this, I definitely spent my time in the bathroom, so to speak, to throwing up before some of these presentations. So if some of this applies to you, or you're like me, when I was in high school, I don't think it's an interesting story. I didn't actually ever in 4 years go to my high school cafeteria, if you can believe that. So 4 years of high school, I didn't even know, to this day, I don't even know where it is in my high school. I spent all the time actually in the drafting room because I have a degree in architectural engineering. I actually can design houses and I can read blueprints and stuff, which is kind of cool. And I used to eat my lunches every day in the drafting room because I would sit with my drafting instructor and I would work on some projects that I was thinking about, and I just never really socialized. I didn't play a lot of sports, which a lot of people find interesting if you follow me on Twitter because of how crazy I am into health and fitness these days. But I wrestled for the last couple years in high school. So I'm not uncommon, I think, as far as some of us go. And I actually started out as an administrator, and we'll get into that a little bit. So this is another great quote, and how many folks, just a poll, when a new project comes along or something gets you excited, that first week or 2 weeks you are just 0 to 100, right? Does that sound familiar? Something new gets your propeller going and you just take off like a bat out of you-know-what, and then about 2 weeks later, you're like, that was cool. What's the next cool thing? I'm exactly like that. I do that all the time, right? It's one of the things that I challenge myself with in my career because I get bored really easily. So when I actually start new projects, it's hard for me to stay motivated. And one of the things about that is, that really makes this quote key, is that's the motivation piece, right? You can get off the blocks really quick when it's something new and exciting. But then it's about the consistency and sticking with it throughout, whether it's the project or whether it's a new technology that you want to learn, because ultimately your brain gets bored, right? It kind of takes a couple weeks and you want to move on to the next thing. And I think all of us are like that. We're all technologists at heart, right? So we like to play with the next knob and turn the next dial and figure out the next great thing. I was in the VEAM session. It was packed this morning, the 10 o'clock session. I walked by the vSphere 6 session and that thing was flowing out the door. And I think that's because it's new stuff, right? And whenever there's new stuff to think about, it's easy for us to learn and grow and want to actually understand what's coming down the pike. If we get stuck and we get stagnant in the job that we do, it's really tough to stay motivated. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. Home labs, man. I worked for this company called PC Connection. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. It's up in Merrimack, New Hampshire. And I started there when I was back in 1997, 98-ish, right? So at one of my roles, I was actually what they called a netcom specialist. Don't ask me where the word netcom came from. Has anybody ever used that term? Netcom? Maybe? No? All right, so I didn't know what it was. So I actually was on the phones. I was a sales guy. And I decided that I wanted to go learn about this thing called Citrix. And I said, well, how am I going to learn about this thing? Because I'm a sales guy, and I sit on the phone all day long. So I actually went out and I bought, at the time, they were Dell workstations. They weren't actual desktops. They were the higher-end desktops that were considered workstations. And you could run this thing called VMware GSX Server on it. So for a show of hands in the room, how many people actually have ever installed GSX Server? Yeah, the numbers are getting smaller. Less and less hands go up. How many folks actually remember ESX 2.0 and 2.5 and actually installed it? About the same number of hands, because I think they were right around the same time. So what was really interesting is I took an opportunity to go home every night and build this lab. I knew nothing about these technologies. I knew nothing about Citrix. I knew about terminal server, and I was selling this stuff. And my goal around building this home lab was so that I could educate myself more, so when I was on the phone with the customers as this specialist, that I could talk intelligently about them. And actually what I started doing is on sales calls, I would actually connect back to my house, my condo, which at the time had it had a 384 DSL circuit. That's how slow it was. And I was using the technologies, I was using Citrix on top of GSX Server to go into this little home lab in my house and demonstrate it for customers on the phone. So the salespeople were just like amazed that this stuff it actually worked and you could do it. And I was actually showing it to customers on WebEx over the phone. Like I was actually having them log in. I actually had guest logins and everything. But at the time, I knew nothing about this stuff. Remember, my degree was actually in architecture, actual building architecture. So I was learning all this stuff on the fly. So I think those of us that have home labs, I think back to what my home lab was then and what it progressed to as I worked through VMware, huge, huge value in those things. Of course, the problem is we always have to spend the money on that equipment. A lot of times we can go beg, borrow, and steal if you know the right person. But the fact that a lot of the VMUGs are giving them away, I think DC actually gave one away a couple weeks ago. I saw Mike Letchin tweet that. So that's kind of how I started my learning process, right, in all these technologies. One of the things that people always ask me is they say, how often we see that you change jobs a lot since I've been in VMware. I'm always tweeting or updating LinkedIn that I've got a new role. And actually that started when I was at PC Connection. And this chart is actually something I put together for over an 8-year span working at PC Connection. So I actually started on the inbound phones, right? And I was actually taking catalog orders over Christmas at 3 o'clock in the morning. So like consumer orders, they wanted iMacs, those ugly little like clear iMacs that people used to buy that looked like a Volkswagen Beetle, right? And that's why I spent my time. And that's where I got into IT, was actually as a salesperson on the phones. And then as I educated myself and decided I want to grow and started to do some self-learning, I moved into what they call corporate sales. I moved into the specialist role. I eventually became a manager of that group and didn't know anything about management. Actually, I will tell you that was one of the great failures in my career. I was a horrible manager because of a lot of reasons. I had no idea how to manage. I've learned over the years that there's a difference between managers and leaders, and I like leaders. I like to follow leaders. I don't like to work for managers. And that's something I talk to people about a lot. When I became a business analyst, that's where my career shifted. I actually started working on a project to develop a new CRM system in-house. And I was the analyst on the project. And I actually ended up working for the executive vice president of the company. And he saw something in me that nobody else had ever seen. I was actually going back to school at the time. I went back to school for information systems. God forbid, I would move from architecture to information systems. And he was really upset that I had a second job. And he said to me, he said, "Why do you have a second job?" I said, "Well, because I'm slightly overextended." That never happens. And he said, "Well, I need you on this project. I need you really focused on this thing." And he said, what if I actually gave you a role in the IT department actually deploying this project that we're working on? Because I actually showed him all of this VMware stuff at that time, or I was talking about it. I was talking about all this cool stuff that was happening. And he said, I can plug you into the IT department. I can just give you a sysadmin role. And I said, you can do that? And he's like, yeah, I kind of run the company, so I can do whatever I want. He said, and I'll give you a raise, because I don't want you, I want you to not focus on this second job. So that began a next stage of education. I became a sysadmin, and I started to introduce all these technologies. I made the joke yesterday for anybody who was in the VCDX workshop that, anybody remember Scrappy-Doo? Scooby and Scrappy-Doo? Right, so Scooby-Doo was kind of like laid back, give me my Scooby snacks, which none of us, we have our idea what was in those things, but nobody ever wants to talk about it. We all know though. And then there was Scrappy-Doo, and what was Scrappy-Doo like? He was at his heels all the time, right, and he was just very hyper, and he was always just, come on, what do we got to do? We got to go do something. Come on, we got to do something. That was me. So I used to literally sit across the row from a sysadmin who had been there for about 10 years. And I was sitting there going, hey, how about this? How about that? Why don't we try this? What about this? How about we go deploy that? And he used to just get so frustrated because I never shut up. And what it turned into was, ultimately I left that role after 8 years and I was their data center architect. I designed an ESX 2.5 environment that went on $1 million worth of Blade Center architecture from IBM. And we were running Citrix on top of VMware on 2.5. And that's how I ended my career at PC Connection. So you don't have to grow in the same, you don't have to change jobs, I guess. And you can actually do this in the same company. If you find the right people to work with and you find the right conversations to have. I'm actually in the middle of repeating that cycle. This year is my 8th year at VMware. October will be my 8-year anniversary. And it actually followed almost the exact same process. I came in PSO because that was the only way to get into VMware back in 2007. If you came into PSO, they'd hire you. And it was me and one other guy in New England, so we pretty much had the Northeast. And then I actually got my VCDX while I was there. I'm actually VCDX number 37. I joined what was called the cloud team. There was this little stint with this thing called the Nasira team, and now I've been through tech marketing. I've worked in the BUs. So growth happens however you want to make it happen. Interestingly enough, I got a call from a friend of mine who works for GE in IT, and he said, I really want to have a conversation. This is before I even told him about this presentation today. He said, I gotta talk to you. And I said, why? He's like, I'm stuck. I feel like I'm stuck in my career. I'm doing the same thing, and I want to get some advice. And I said, it's kind of funny because I'm doing this presentation today on this very topic. So why don't you give me a call this week, and I'll see what I can do to help mentor you and give you some guidance. Which actually brings me to another interesting topic that's really close to my heart. Has anybody in the room ever actually had a mentor, a true-to-life mentor? A few hands go up. So when I took that business analyst role, that gentleman by the name of Bob Wilkins, this is Bob, he was the executive VP of PC Connection, and I earned his respect one day because I walked into this room as a networking specialist, or as business analyst. This is before he put me in IT. And we were having this meeting, and there's all these execs sitting around, and all these guys in suits and ties, and I was literally dressed like this. And he asked a question about this application that he wanted to buy. And the way Bob's really cool. He's a very smart guy. He started a bunch of companies. He's a successful entrepreneur. He's in the middle of launching a brand new company that is out there called Zifter.com up in New Hampshire. And he's a Seahawks fan. So the last Super Bowl was I'm a Patriots fan, so that was kind of an interesting FaceTime on the streets of San Francisco after the win. And he actually asked everybody around the room about this application, because he was very set in his ways. He had ideas, and he had great ideas. Every once in a while, though, his ideas weren't that great. Anybody ever sat in a room where somebody where everybody was a yes man around the table? You ever been part of those meetings? Where everybody just says, yeah, it's a great idea. Well, anybody who knows me knows that I am the last thing but a yes man. I call it like it is. Right? If I don't like something, I'm going to tell you I don't like it. I'm going to tell you why I don't like it, and I might give you another suggestion, because I was also taught you never tell somebody that something's no good without another option. Right? You have to sort of provide an option to the problem. So he goes around the room and he tells everybody about this great idea he has. And he gets to me, and I'm sort of sitting back because I don't know any of these guys. Right? I just got called into this thing because I was his business analyst at the time. And he says, Chris, what do you think? And I said, well, I really don't think it's a great idea. And you just see the eyes and the jaws drop in the room. And he called me over afterwards, and he said, I got to tell you, I really respected that you called me out on that. He goes, he's like, I think I still want to do it, but but I respect your opinion, and I think that you have a lot of things to offer, and that's why I want you to come work for me. Actually, it was before I started working for him. To this day, he's actually a really good friend of mine. We talk, here and there. He's really busy, but he's one of those guys I can always call up and say, I got a problem. I got something I'm thinking about. I got this new change I want to do. I want to shift something in my career. And he's always there to give me any one of these things. And when you're looking for a mentor, you're out there trying to get advice, these are the kind of things you want to look for in a person, right? You want to actually find somebody who's got experience that you want to learn from. Are they actually on the track or doing the things that you want to do? Right? Are they at your own company? Are they outside your company? Are they somebody on Twitter that you know that you've mentioned or that you follow and you want to just ask them a couple of questions about how they got to where they're going? They're there to coach you, right? This call I'm going to do tomorrow with my friend, I mean, we talk every once in a while, and really I'm just going to try to give him some guidance and some advice and try to help him along and get him to the next level, because he's like a lot of us. He gets stuck. IT is an interesting career because if you're not careful, you do become complacent in what you do. And there's people who just like being system admins, and then there are people who just want to gravitate and graduate into other aspects. Some people want to be CTOs, some people want to be architects. They want to move out of the role they're in, and some people don't. And I think that's something that everybody has to figure out. So if you don't have a mentor, it's definitely something that you want to try to find or reach out. And there's very few hands that went up in the room, and it would be interesting to talk to some of those folks about how they've actually worked with their mentors. We've all seen this. Everybody familiar with SMART goal setting? Yeah? You ever use it or actually apply it? There's actually one of these 5 things that always seems to fall off when I talk to people. And actually probably 2. The top one and the bottom one. Most people are very rarely specific about their goals, and they almost never put a time frame around it, which makes it really difficult to reach the goal if it's very broad and you have no idea when you want to reach it by. And I'll give you an example. We talk to a lot of people that are striving to get their VCDX, and the first question I ask them is, when do you want to submit for your defense? And they just stare at me. I say, you do know that we have published dates, right? And they say, well, yeah. And I say, well, which one do you want to submit for? Because each one's got a deadline. And they have no idea. I said, so you're telling me your goal is to be a VCDX, but you have no idea which time frame you want to submit for. So how are you going to go from point A to point B if you don't know which one you even want to go for? You're just going to wait forever until it comes around. And there was a guy in the class yesterday, I apologize, I can't remember your name, but all I remember is he had a Trend Micro shirt on. And he's probably somewhere around here. But he actually said that. He said, I think it was Jeff. Was it Jeff? He said, you know what, this class was great because it got me to just realize that I need to stop screwing around. I just got to set a goal to it and go for it. And that's the interesting thing, is when you set the right goals and you actually apply some of these things and you make them part of this SMART goal setting and you think about how to do it, it actually makes it achievable. And little wins count. Maybe for some people it's, I want to be a VCDX, but I don't even have my VCAP. So you set the time frame when you want to get your VCAP. And you actually book the test. Right? I'll give you another perfect example because I love anecdotes. My wife was, just yesterday, she took her exam for her personal trainer certification with AFA, A-F-A-A. And it's a written exam and it's a practical exam. So you actually had to do a WebEx and help the person on the other end of the phone. And it's been about 2 years and a half since she's been studying because there was never an end date kind of thing. And we talked about it, and I said, hey, when are you going to take your exam? She's like, I don't know. So why don't you just book it? Because if you book the exam, whether you pass it or you fail it, at least you know what to expect. And she thought about it, and she said, you know what, yeah, because that'll force me to do some stuff, right? You put that line in the sand. You draw the line, and you stand by it, no matter what it is. Whether it's something with your career, whether it's something in your personal life, you kind of set that line. And I'm happy to say she passed the practical, she didn't pass the written. So she has to take the written one again. But she's already booked the next one while everything's fresh in her mind, right? So she knows what to expect out of it. So think about this the next time you're working on or looking yourself in the mirror and trying to decide what you want to do and where you want to go with your career. There's some things that I think about as you get to move forward, or you start to think about how you want to progress. And this isn't meant to be, I like some of these images because they can be interpreted a couple different ways. When I first picked this one out, I had one interpretation, and then as I read it, I'm like, wow, somebody could pick to interpret this as Chris has sort of an attitude about himself because the view from the top is really good. That's not what I mean by it. What I mean is that the struggle to get to where you're going, I'm a hiker. I don't hike huge mountains. I mean, I like to go hiking and mountain biking, but one thing I always enjoy is when you go for a hike, through the woods, and you're climbing up these areas, and everything's covered in trees, and all of a sudden you get to the top, right? You get to the destination, and there's this little mountain in New Hampshire called Packmanadnock, and I had never hiked it. And when you get to the top, this town is about 80 miles from Boston, the city of Boston. And from the top of that hill, there's no trees. You can actually see the Prudential Center in Boston from the top of that hill. And it's kind of an interesting feeling to just stand there and realize what you've accomplished and how far you came and how long it took you to get there and all the things you went through to make that happen. And a lot of times, you have to multitask a little bit. It isn't something that you just kind of focus on and do, and then you go do the next thing. Everybody has a life, right? How many folks got kids and wives and husbands and significant others? And I don't have kids, but I have dogs. And I have 2 5-year-old puppies, which are insane. One was okay, and we lost our dog just before Thanksgiving, and we decided, well, if one was good, 2 will be better, right? Not really, because they're completely different personalities, just like kids. And we spend a lot of time running up and down the stairs in between work, because they're crying, got to take them out, got to do this. But you have to figure out how to manage your time and how to make these things work. When I was on the sales, when I was at PC Connection and I was doing that home lab thing, I was doing it at night. I talked to a lot of people that are VCDXs, and two of the guys that are here that'll be here later, Tim and Brian. I guarantee you they'll tell you they spend a lot of their own time working on it. A lot of the time spent on real customer engagements, right? Their designs tend to come from a real customer engagement, but the actual work of putting all the package together and making it match the blueprint and all that stuff is stuff we got to find time to do, right? How many hours are there in a day? Nobody knows. Well, that's sad. 24, right? We spend how much of it sleeping and how much of it working. It's really interesting. Like, I used to do this silly math every once in a while, and I always told people I didn't have time to do stuff, or people tell me they don't have time for it. You ask them to do something like, I don't have time. How much time do you have? And they don't know how to answer the question. I like to reverse the questions. When they say they don't have enough time, I say, well, how much time do you have? And they still can't answer. So as you're trying to think about how to grow yourself in your career, you have to figure out how to work it into everybody's busy schedule, right? We travel, we sit on planes, a lot of us are flying all the time. I get a lot of stuff done on planes. I get a lot of stuff done in hotels. Strangely enough, I get more done in a hotel than I do in my home office, because there's no dogs. There's no barking, there's no yelling. So growth happens in different areas of your life. This is one of those things that is interesting, and I was caught on this particular topic, and there's a lot of people in this industry that, if you follow them on Twitter, and frankly I've been accused of it, that have some ego, right? They've been out there a long time, they know their stuff, and I think there's a fine line. I actually wrote a blog article a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and it was titled "The Difference Between Confidence and Cocky," right? And it's a thin line between somebody who's confident and somebody who's cocky. And it's really easy to float between the two lines. And if you let your ego get in the way, it will kill your success. It really will. Tony Horton's not wrong. He actually said this in relationship to working out in the gym, right? Because you go grab, I've done it. I threw my back out years ago. Couldn't walk for about 2 days because I was trying to, outdo myself. So, because I feel that there's an intermingling between mind, body, and spirit, actually, what you'll find is if you go to VMware, anybody been to campus, VMware campus? Right, so we got a really nice gym on campus. And if you go to that gym at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, which the only person you'll find there is probably Duncan, because he's not sleeping from the night before, or somebody from the Netherlands. The other 2 people you're going to find in that gym, anybody want to take a guess? Pat Gelsinger, Carl Eschenbach. 2 of the biggest leaders in VMware, because they understand that as part of your overall career, as part of your human nature, you have to have healthy mind, healthy body, healthy spirit. It all works together. You work more productively. You're able to find those different times in your day, right? You're able to actually be more awake. You're able to do things that you couldn't do before. Because how many of us are, 8 o'clock rolls around and it's just, shoulders roll forward, you just want to hit the rack, go to bed. But you're working on your VCDX and you got 2 more hours of stuff to do and you just can't focus on it. I used to have that problem. I used to have a very hard time focusing. Mostly because I was about 250 pounds and I was asthmatic and I had allergies and I couldn't actually walk around the yard to mow the lawn. So I decided that as part of my personal growth, and this isn't a soapbox for any of this stuff, it's just giving you some insight into my own personal history. I decided to go out and I said enough was enough. And I said, hell with this. I can be way more productive and way better at what I do in my regular day job if I make one of my goals to knock all that off and figure out how to move forward. It's just something to think about. I think it's interesting when I saw Pat in there early one morning and I said, hey, and Bob, by the way, Bob is actually an avid cyclist. He actually does competitions. He does marathons. So some of the most successful people out there, they actually understand this concept. So I've quoted this gentleman a few times, and has anybody ever heard of John Maxwell? If you haven't, there's a list of 3 or 4 of his books at the end of this presentation, which I highly recommend if you're thinking about how to grow your career. Growing your career starts with growing yourself. And I got to hear this individual speak in person 2 years ago at a conference. And it actually was another turning point in my life because the way he spoke and the things that he actually talked about really resonated. I was stuck. I was trying to figure out a lot of things. And I read 3 of his books, 3 of his laws books, and he's written about like 97 books or something like that. He actually has a company now called the John Maxwell Team. And one of my goals is actually to potentially go through that Maxwell Team training and actually become somebody who does these kind of talks within VMware and other places, because I think what he does is amazing. The trick is, doesn't matter whether it's Mr. Maxwell or a mentor, you have to decide when you want to make this change. Only you can decide that. Most people, they check the later box, right? I went and I got to hear him speak, and I literally was on my phone on iTunes, because I like audiobooks. I'm an audiobook kind of guy. I don't like to read. I can read. I know how to read. I just don't enjoy it. Puts me to sleep. But when I do an audiobook, here's a tip I found. I'm a visual person. Most of us are, right? I transcribe things in my head. If I write something down, I remember it a lot longer than if I just hear it. So what I was doing for a couple of months, I was traveling a lot. I downloaded a bunch of his books on audio, and I would sit on a plane with my iPhone with the audiobook and my iPad with Evernote. And as every chapter was being read in my headphones, I was taking notes as if it was a lecture. And I actually can now go back and search this giant list of Evernotes of all the books that I've listened to for different anecdotes and quotes and things that I want to remember about a particular topic. So I've kind of started to do that every time, and it's actually a neat trick. I never thought of it before. Nobody's told me to do it. I just said, well, if I just listen to the audiobook, that's cool. But if I read the book, then I'm going to fall asleep. So if I'm listening and I'm typing, I'm probably going to stay awake and I'm going to absorb some more stuff. So every audiobook that I do now, I actually use that. But it's a cool technique. So one thing that actually always comes up in our lives is change. There's really only a couple of constants in our lives, right? And we usually say it's what? Death and taxes. Taxes are over. But I actually think change is a constant. And one thing about change that I've learned over the years as I've gone on from my 20s and my 30s and now into my 40s is that change is inevitable. And if you don't actually adapt to change well, you're quite bluntly screwed. Because it's going to happen every day, all day. And the funny thing is people think they adapt to change until something comes down the pike, right? And it can be anything. It could be your 401k plan changes, your health insurance changes. You pick anything in your life that changes. And how do you react to it? The key is the reaction to it, right? And this is an interesting book. I read this book a long time ago when I was at PC Connection, because at the time I was a complainer. I was one of those guys who was like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why does everybody keep changing this? Why does the compensation plan keep changing? Why am I making less commission? This is crap. And the manager said, and he went to his whole row. We actually sat in sales rows. And he bought this book for everybody. And what's funny is I posted this on Facebook, and a friend of mine, Tim Gleed, who works for VCE, and now I think he works for EMC, he read a couple of the quotes from this book that I posted. He bought it all for his entire team, and they all loved it. It's literally like probably a 2-hour read at the most, right? But if you don't adapt well to change and you want to grow your career, it's kind of oil and water. Because as part of your growing process, there's a lot of change that goes with it. And I see this a lot on Twitter. Man, Twitter has become the bane of my existence, but it's part of my job. And I know full well, part of any program, we announce updates and changes and all these other things. I'm like, whatever, right? Because I've learned there's 2 piles of stuff on my desk at any given time. This is how I approach it. There's this pile over here. My dad taught me this. My dad taught me a lot of things. This pile is a pile you just throw on the floor because you can't change it. Right, and we talk about VCDXs and we talk about things like constraints. That's the whole pile of constraints. I can't change them. They just move on. They are what they are. No sense in losing any time over it. Then there's a pile of stuff I can work with, and that's the one I focus on. But, you know, if you're afraid of change and you don't react well to change, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to grow. And that's the whole point. You want to move to the next level. And moving to the next level involves a lot of change in your career and your life. I mean, everything happens. People who've had kids know that, right? What do they say? Having a baby changes everything. There used to be a commercial, I think, right? And having dogs changes everything too. So you really can only be happy and grow once you learn to accept it. And everybody has to figure that out on their own. It's really tough. And I've had some of my own challenges over the years. You know, as I've gotten older, I've started to wonder about the next 30 years. I've started to look at my parents and wonder what happens, right? That change is going to come, and I don't know how I'm going to deal with it. So I actually mentioned this a little bit previously, and Duncan actually posted this in a blog article, because a lot of people didn't know this about him, that he was really afraid of public speaking. And if you read the blog article, he was pretty honest. It was actually a great article. And I'm really good friends with him. And we used to do presentations together. And a lot of people used to ask, you know, why do you guys do so many presentations together? And part of it was I was really comfortable on stage, and he wasn't. So it became a nice balance. Because when he was trying to get more comfortable, it was always easier to be on stage with somebody who is comfortable. And actually learn and adapt with them and work off of some of their mannerisms. And I think this was really great of him to put this out there, because it was one of those things that people don't think about somebody in the community that's really well respected. And that we were talking, this actually came up because we were talking about VCDX specifically, and how you can't just get off the couch and become a VCDX, right? If you're not good at public speaking, or you're not good at speaking in front of a crowd, best place to do it is at VMUGs, and that's where he started. He started doing presentations at the local VMUGs to get more comfortable to small groups of people and expand to large groups of people. The biggest presentation him and I ever did together was him and Frank and Duncan and I, and myself, or Duncan and Frank and myself, and I was moderating. It was 1,200 people in the room at VMworld. And that was a huge crowd, right? I mean, both of them were just, and I was, you know, calm as can be. I did my thing beforehand and calmed myself down because I was good at doing that. So some people have seen this before, but you know, there's your comfort zone and then there's everything else outside of it, right? How many folks think they actually branch outside of their comfort zone on a regular basis? Good. That's awesome. Most people don't. Kind of sit right here. It's nice and good. It's warm. It's cozy, right? It's like that cool night, that sleeping at night, you get the right blanket on and it's like, yeah, I'm good, right? And then morning comes and you rip that sucker off and it's 2 degrees outside. You get the shock to the system. But it's really challenging to move from this little area around yourself into this bigger thing and actually try new things. And no matter what it is, you know, another anecdote, I never owned a motorhome. I always wanted a motorhome. Don't ask me why. It was just one of my dreams. I just wanted one of the big-ass RVs that you just drive down the road. My wife thought I was nuts. So we sold our house in New Hampshire, and what did I go out and buy? Bought my RV. And she said, what are we going to do with that? And I said, we're going to live in that for the next 8 months. And she's still married to me. It was, by the 8th month, I will tell you, it was getting pretty testy. But we're going camping next week, surprisingly enough. We want to get back into it. But one of I had never driven. If you've never, what's the biggest car you've ever driven, right? Think about this. I got behind the wheel of this thing and I went, I don't need any other license. And the guy says, nope. I said, you're kidding me. Like, my regular, you know, New Hampshire driver's license? He's like, yep. I said, all right, well, that's where the magic happens, because I got to get from New Hampshire to Tennessee in the next 2 days, because that's where we're moving to. Strapped on the seatbelt, had a list. I had a little checklist of everything I needed to go through, and I just started driving. And then I hit wind and rain and everything else. And it's a simple example, but everything in life we do, you're always going to be outside of that comfort zone. Whether it's work or personal, it doesn't matter. So, maybe some of you folks are aspiring to eventually achieve VCDX, right? But before you get there, there's all these other layers of things you can do. There's VCIX or VCAP. There's VCP. Some folks in the room, how many V-experts are actually in the room? Good chunk of them, actually, right? So for some people, being a V-expert or striving to be a V-expert may be the first step. Because when you're a V-expert, you got to be out in the community, and you got to be talking to other people, and you got to evangelize, VMware technology. Maybe you've never done that in a public forum before. I remember when I got on Twitter, and I regret every minute of it sometimes. But it was in 2010. We were doing VCDX panels in Cambridge, and I was talking to Duncan. I was actually confiding in him about what to do next, and that's when he started talking to me about blogging. I'd never had a blog, right? So I actually went back up in the hotel. Interesting story. I was really upset with the hotel because I was a Marriott Platinum member or whatever, and they didn't do nothing for me when I came in, and I tweeted it. Or no, I actually emailed them or something. The manager came up, and I got the presidential suite for like the whole week in Cambridge, Mass. So everybody, there's pictures like Frank and Duncan, everybody at the piano, because it was like a piano up there. But I went back up to this giant suite on like a Tuesday, and I registered chriscolotti.us. And I went and I started researching this thing called WordPress, right? Which is now just everybody uses it, right? And I started figuring out how I was going to write a blog. What was I going to blog about? Who would want to listen to what I have to say? And I think I had like 10 Twitter followers. And I think I don't check it anymore. I don't pay attention to it as much as I used to when I first started, but I think I'm, upward, close to 5,000 followers or something. But it's not about that. It's about being out in the community and having people who want to listen to what you have to say. So maybe VExpert is your first piece, or you want to get your VCP, or most people already probably have their VCP, or you want to strive for VCDX. Great. I say go for it. And sometimes, we have to have faith. Faith is a difficult thing to have when you're trying to grow and you're trying to learn, and you have to take that leap, and you have to jump off the edge and figure out if there's going to be water in the pool when you land in it, and what's below. Right? I am afraid of heights, so this is an interesting analogy, because I won't even climb like a 10-foot step ladder without freaking out. So I don't know why I talk about jumping off a cliff, because I would never do it. But because of that, my personal leap of faith was a cruise that my wife and I were on for our honeymoon. Not our honeymoon. Anniversary. 5-year anniversary. We went on the Oasis of the Seas, like giant cruise ship. It's like the biggest one in the world. And they have a zip line that goes over the deck. It actually goes across the ship, and you look down about 15 decks into just, people's rooms. So I said, I'm afraid of heights, so I'm going to do the zip line thing, because I've never done it. It's like 3 seconds, right? So I got on there, and I was nervous as hell looking down, and all the guy said was just have faith and step off the platform. What else can you do? Right? And then you get to the end, you got to figure out how to stop. But it's interesting. A lot of people don't think about this, and sometimes this quote is very poignant, because the only way to get to where you're going, it might be the only mode of transportation. There's actually a slide that I think got hidden that I'm surprised, because I memorized this whole deck for this presentation, because I told myself I was going to try to really be good about not looking at the screen as one of my goals. And one of them was actually about humility. And there was actually, it was right after that Tony Horton quote, because I can tell you where it was in the slide deck. And I want to tell you that you got to be humble as you go through this process. And I started to talk about it, and then the slide changed, and I realized I screwed up, so I'm going to go back and chat about it for a second. But I actually got caught not being so humble one day. So I had my VCDX. I was VCDX number 37. And years later, a friend of mine, Greg Herzog, I'll even say his name. He's a VCDX now, because if he watches this video, it'll be great. We were working, he was going through his process of his VCDX, and I had worked with him. He joined VMware. We were doing a project up in Canada, and we were working on some cloud stuff. We were working on vCloud Director. And we got along really well. He was from New Jersey, New York area. I was from New England, so we kind of had that New York, New England banter thing going on. We became really good friends really quick. And about a year later, he went through his VCDX, and I was in a bad place. I was actually just mentally not in a really good spot. And he called me up and he said, hey, I want to review this design with you that I'm doing for a customer. And I made a comment, and at the time the comment didn't mean anything to me because of where my head was at. And I'll tell you, the comment was, I kind of thought I said it jokingly. So you're a VCDX now, you think you know everything? I believe was the exact comment. And I figured because of our relationship, you know, we were very, very candid with each other, and I just figured I'd take it as a joke. And you know, he moved on to another role in the vCloud business unit when vCloud Air actually was starting to get launched, and I was taking a role as tech marketing. And I got an email from him one day, and what was interesting is it was about this long. And it went into every possible detail of what kind of utter, total piece of crap I was. And I was amazed. Not amazed. I didn't do what most people would normally do, which is the knee-jerk reaction. You go on the defensive and fire a volley back over. I actually read it 2 or 3 times. And I actually thought about it, and I said, from the time that we had that conversation a year ago, and he actually called that out, he was very specific. Anybody ever been to a Crucial Conversations class? It's all about specifics. He actually went into a lot of specifics. And I sat back, and I read it 2 or 3 times, and there's some other things that happened in between, and I had become a little bit more humble since then. And I thought about it, and I picked up the phone, and I called him up. And this was probably from the time he got the red receipt to when I called him, maybe 20, 30 minutes had gone by. So he sees my number call, and he answered it, and I heard the sigh on the other end of the phone. And there's something they teach you in sales that most people who've never been in phone sales, strictly phone sales, know in person. People can actually hear you smile. That's the way the comment goes, and it's true. Next time you talk to somebody, listen to them. You can, even if you close your eyes, you can tell right now if I'm smiling or not when I'm talking. And I heard it, and I heard him smile. And I said, so, I got your email. And he said, yeah. I said, you're regretting hitting the send button, aren't you? And he said, a little bit. And I said, well, listen, I actually want to say thank you. And he paused, and he said, wow, why? And I said, well, because you're absolutely right. Everything in that email is spot on. And that opportunity that you just gave me to think about it and grow was something that I don't think anybody would ever do. And because of who you are and what you did, you had the, to send such a thing? But now let's talk about it. And we actually talked about it, and he said, look, I really felt like we were going to have a problem if you came into the business unit. We had to work together again. I didn't want this hanging over our heads. So what I learned about Greg was that he grew as well. He grew in the same time period. Although he was very upset when he sent the email, he went through his own process, right? And now we talk not as regular as we used to. He'll ping me every once in a while. He tries a lot. So be humble. Try to be humble as you go through the process. Humility is a wonderful thing if you can master it. With that, I actually want to end with the same quote that I started with, which is growth doesn't just happen. Right? All these things I've talked about, you have to be committed to it. You have to be specific about it. And you have to make it a point to have it in your life. You have to make it a point to put these things on your radar, because if you don't, you're just going to stay where you are. Now let me ask this. Now that I've kind of had this conversation, I should have done this before and I apologize, but how many folks, we'll try to go back in time. Before I ever started this talk, how many folks didn't really have a thought in the world about where they were and what they wanted to do and where they wanted to go? Show of hands. You're just going off on your day job. So how many folks after hearing this think that maybe there's something else they might want to look at and go try to achieve that maybe you didn't within reach, right? So that was the goal of this whole presentation, was to talk a little bit about my career and how I actually walked through some of these things, and hopefully inspire some folks to do something different. Definitely hit me up on Twitter, ask me questions, as much as I hate Twitter these days, but I am available on there. I don't have all the time in the world to have one-on-one conversations, but I guide folks that are going through the VCDX program as best I can on a regular basis. I had somebody yesterday. Actually, their question was interesting. They they said, how many pages should I have in my design? And I said, how many pages do you want? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, it's a design, right? So the way you think about the design is if you're handing me this design, how many pages of information do you need to make it crystal clear to me on how to go deploy and implement the design that you're talking about? Can you do it in a page? Can you do it in 300 pages? That's up to you. There's no set limit. There's no set specific around the program and how big you want this thing to be. So hopefully this gives you something to reach for. Some of the stuff that I referenced in this presentation, those are the law, what I call John Maxwell's laws books. I think they're great. The first one that I actually read was the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. I started with that one, and then I went to the leadership one, and then the teamwork one. Teamwork one's kind of interesting if you work on teams of people, because as you read it, you'll identify all the stuff that everybody's doing wrong on the team to work together, and you can actually try to help people. And I've actually used some of the concepts in that book on the teams that I've worked with, and it's actually been pretty valuable. And then you've got your, everybody knows yellow bricks, but I had to give Duncan credit for it, so since you wrote the article. And, you know, we've got, this was supposed to go till about 10 past, and I ran a little bit long because of the missed slide. So I appreciate the time. Thank you. And there is a little bit of time for questions if anybody wants to throw questions out. I know Mike has the mic.
Yeah, if anybody has any